Welcome to the Stress to Best podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Wagner, a mindset coach and hypnotist. Each week, I'll bring you powerful tools, transformative resources, and inspiring conversations with guests who have turned their stress also into successes. Together, we'll dive deep into overcoming anxiety, building confidence, and creating a life of joy and fulfillment. Whether you're feeling stuck or you're ready for a change, then this podcast is for you. So let's get started on your journey from stressed to best. Welcome back to another episode of the Stress to Best podcast. Today I have another amazing guest from you. And he's from the UK of all places. He is the host of the world's most popular hypnosis podcast called The Hypnotist. He has been in this industry for over a decade now, and he has helped people from all around the world. So let me introduce you to my friend, Adam. Welcome, Adam.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you for being here with us today. So tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got into all of this.
So most people from the hypnotherapy world know me as being a host of the podcast called The Hypnotist. For those that aren't familiar with The Hypnotist, the concept is reasonably unique for hypnosis podcasts because there's lots of training and information-based hypnosis podcasts. My hypnosis podcast is a bit different in the sense that you're actually listening to real hypnosis sessions based on real issues faced by real clients. But I protect the confidentiality of the client. So how I do that is every client that I work with, I record my voice during their session, and it's that voice that gets used as the podcast. So it completely protects the confidentiality. And in the intro, I kind of explain, again, without breaking any confidentiality, the techniques or the approaches that I use to help that particular client, and based on their situation. So there's two main audiences that really listen. The primary audience is people that have a similar issue to the original client that I was working with. So if I was working with someone that had a phobia or couldn't sleep or wants to lose weight, and they have that issue, then they stumble across it and they are kind of getting the same hypnosis session, but for free. And then the other audience is other hypnotherapists, because I think most hypnotherapy takes place behind closed doors. So you get lots of teaching and training examples on YouTube and podcast, but you don't actually get to hear or see the actual hypnosis that took place. So there's a lot of hypnotherapists curious about actually listening to real hypnotherapy sessions. And it's not necessarily like it's the best way, but it's the way that I did it. And then it becomes a reference point or perhaps a source of inspiration. So most people know me from that. In the UK, I was featured a lot in the national media, so TV, radio, magazines, newspapers. So I had a reputation built in the UK as someone that was working with celebrities and quite, kind of successful people. And partly that came from the location where my clinic was. For those people that know England and London, Harley Street is quite a prestigious address. And when I became a hypnotherapist, I thought I would just leapfrog and queue jump. So I went straight to the most prestigious address in London, and that gave me what hypnotherapists would know as prestige. It serves the same function of having letters after your name or a certificate behind you on the wall. That address actually meant that even as a beginner, people were assuming I was much more competent than I was. And that got me the clients, and working with so many clients actually gave me the competence that I needed, if that makes sense. So it depends on how people hear about me. Some people haven't heard the podcast or see me in the media. They've only seen me talk at conferences. They would have a different, kind of perception of who I am.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I don't think I'm from Canada and I don't really know that Harley Street as this prestige thing, although to be able to have that right away, and even though you may or may not have had that confidence at the beginning, to be able to just go all in and see what would happen and then get it. That's how we get that confidence, right? Is from just taking the action and doing it. So I love that. I love that.
I
So
stole
how
the
did you get
strategy
into
from a I
Mm-hmm.
stole the strategy from a conversation that I had when I started in the radio industry. And it was this Australian sales trainer, and he was telling me the story of this woman that he knew that really wanted to work in hairdressing. And instead
Okay.
of going to like an expensive kind of college and this kind of thing, which was the normal pathway, she became a free apprentice. Just said, "I'll work for free in one of the most exclusive salons in Sydney." And then
Mm,
eventually a chair became free, and then she was offered that chair. She had to pay for it, but then she would get the clients. So then at a very early age, she was in this kind of exclusive salon, built up a reputation, built up a client base, and then set up her own salon. And then at the age of like 29, decided she didn't want to be a hairdresser anymore and kind of retired. But that
hmm.
element of being in the right place and getting the high quality clients, I kind of just borrowed that strategy and
So good.
I equate that to NLP modeling. You know, a
Oh,
lot of what I
absolutely.
consider I do is figuring out a structure or a strategy that a client has and then mapping that across to a different area of their life. And I think as hypnotherapists, we're pretty good at seeing the structure rather than the superficial side of things. So for me, it's like if a strategy works, apply it to my life. And I would love to say it was my strategy. I just stole it from someone else.
You borrowed it.
I
It's
stole it.
so
I totally stole it.
it's so true because that's what NLP and hypnosis is all about is modeling the study of success, right? So why not do what is successful and working for someone else when you know that they're getting results from it and you can do it in your life. And there's so many people that, well, like Einstein says, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So it's like you can continue doing what you're doing, which may be hard, or you can see what somebody else is doing and see how successful they are at doing it and give it a go in whatever field or industry you're doing it. Take those implications and let it go and see what happens, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would also say one of the big tragedies of hypnotherapy is that there's lots of very well trained hypnotherapists
Hmm.
that quit because they don't have enough clients.
Yes.
And I think if I had one thing that gave me an edge when I started, it's because I already had about 20 years worth of business experience running a PR agency. So I understood about marketing, I understood about branding, I understood about positioning. And I always thought about hypnosis is that you don't become a good hypnotist by reading books and doing training. You become a
Hmm.
good hypnotist by doing lots of hypnosis.
Yes.
And for me, that was about I had a way of acquiring clients, and acquiring the clients gave me the experience. And then with that experience gave me the confidence and the competency. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of hypnotherapists that should be great hypnotherapists, but because they haven't figured out how to acquire a constant stream of clients, sometimes they fall into the trap of thinking that they need more training, that if they become a better hypnotherapist and have more certificates, that will get them more clients. But the average client doesn't care about the letters after your name or the certificates that you have. It's can they find you and can you give them reassurance that you can solve their problem? And I was
Absolutely.
able to do that bit, which then gave me the experience, which, it all kind of rippled from there.
Yeah, it is so true. So what are some of the types of clients you've worked with? Like what are some of those fun sessions that you've had that have made big changes from some in people just going from someone who's like really down on themselves, really stressed to like a whole different version of them?
The one that springs to my mind, and it was just a single session, but it was a lady who was in her 60s.
Hmm.
She was sexually assaulted when she was like 14, 15 years old. She had never really had friends as a child. She was kind of like a very lonely person. Her issue that she presented with was hair pulling. So she would keep pulling her hair until it started bleeding and then kind of scabbing. But it was a coping strategy.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me that this all came from childhood, and effectively she was an unwanted child. She was an only child in a family of parents that didn't really want her. And then they used um, her as an outlet for that resentment or frustration. So do horrible
Mm.
things like, bathe her in too hot water to kind of burn her and like
Aw.
really kind of vile, unpleasant stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, and with that session, I did a form of timeline or regression, and it was kind of inner child work, but she got to be the thing that she never had as a child, which was a
Mm.
friend. She got to be a
Aw, I
friend
love
to her
that.
younger version of herself. But also, we did some certain approaches that helped with the sexual assault, to kind of reframe that to make her feel more like a survivor than a victim or empowered. And yeah, the symptoms of hair pulling went away straight away. But she was an artist and she drew this kind of incredible picture based on her using a time machine to go back in time.
Love it.
If I knew I was going to be talking about it, I'd have the picture I could show you. It's a very kind of cool kind of picture. But effectively, that was quite profound because she'd been living with the aftermath of that kind of horrible childhood for decades.
Yeah.
And then in one session, it improved. But the nature of my podcast is that I've had some very unusual clients with quite interesting things. There's yeah, a wide kind of variety. So when I started, I was working with kind of phobias and kind of weight loss and addictions.
Okay.
And now it's become very broad because every time I do a podcast episode about a new topic, it then ranks quite high for SEO. So then I get more clients with that same issue. So it kind of
Ah.
it goes into this like um the metaphor I use is that of a hydra. You chop off one head and two more heads grow. But it now is this kind of multi-headed thing where I can't quite have a niche. My niche is
Right.
that I have a podcast that reaches lots of people. So now I end up being, quite varied rather than initially when I started, which was very focused. But the nature of that is that, yeah, I've had some wonderful and unusual clients to work with.
And what I love about that is that, because yes, they're always like, oh, niche down, niche down, niche down. Although your niche is just hypnosis. And then depending on what you're putting out, you're going to help those people. And I'm sure it comes in waves. I see that a lot with my practice as well in both massage and hypnosis, that it comes in waves. It's like one day it's like this is like, okay, today is this day. And what I love at what you're saying with this lady, how she has been dealing with this issue for decades and took one session, which I'm sure if she had gone to other things, it would take many. And it was probably content free, wasn't it? Where you didn't have to actually go in and like,
Yeah,
I love it, hypnosis,
I
content
did
free.
disassociated regression, so it wasn't quite content free.
Okay.
I wanted to go back to some of the most painful memories, and then she would
Okay.
either comfort herself or do that, but disassociated. There's no point taking a person back into a memory that's horrible and traumatic, but she got to be the friend and the comforter um, to the version of her that never had that. So it
Right.
wasn't content free, but
Okay.
it was fairly kind of open so that each time she listened to the recording, she could kind of go back to
Mhm.
a different memory.
And I like that because, yeah, you can do content free, although the disassociated way is also very powerful. I've used that many, many times. And it just makes such a power. Like, if you can do that in one session, imagine how you can help other people in just like a conversation. And I don't know about
Mm.
you, but I've done that with a lot of people where it's just through one conversation I have with them on the street or in the grocery store or wherever, they're like, what did you just do? I'm like, nothing. I talked to you. So I'm sure you get that a lot too, don't you?
I think hypnotherapists that use lots of metaphor in their hypnosis sessions can't have a normal conversation without
No.
bringing in so many analogies and so many metaphors. I think it's and we're very aware, I think, of the different linguistic things. So if you hear someone say a really disempowering belief, there's almost like an innate response, an intuitive response to kind of to challenge that belief and say, yeah, are you sure that's true? Like that can't be right. Like in all cases, you kind of meta model it and you're kind of doing covert therapy.
Hmm.
But as long as it's helpful, and again, there's no gun to the head of any person to force change, but
Exactly.
you're creating that kind of catalyst for them to reconsider that belief perhaps in a new way.
Hmm.
So I think it can happen, but I think that's very different from this kind of I think there is a group of people that study hypnosis through the lens of manipulation and control and coercion. And sometimes you can tell that because they're using NLP language in almost a kind of Machiavellian way. And then they're like, and you, like me, also feel this way. And it's fucking odd if I'm honest. But there are some kind of creepy people that have this kind of intention to use it in more um, malevolent, I can't even say the word, malicious ways, let's say.
It's true. And there's bad people and there's also good people. And I know you're a good person. I'm a good person. That's why we're doing this together. And we are going to be going to a conference soon, which I'm super, super excited about. and we're going to see a whole bunch of more amazing hypnotists there. And you're talking about something a little bit different this time than because I know you usually do nested loops, which you are amazing at, and I've told you that before. What are you speaking on this time? Something about the 4D of hypnosis or
Yeah.
something like that?
So I I love metaphors, and what dawned on me is that one of my sources of metaphors is actually movies, and I'm kind of drawn to movies that either play with perception or play with time. So I like the time travel genre, and I like the parallel universe and metaverse genre, and I like the kind of um, different ways in which, Inception is a great metaphor for nested loops. So I like these things that distort perception and time,
Hmm.
first person, third person, kind of things. What I found is that the more I thought about the fourth dimension, the less imagination seemed to fit with a three-dimensional realm, and the more it fitted with a four-dimensional realm. So,
Okay.
for example, think of a straight line is one dimension,
Yeah.
and a two-dimensional shape, like a circle, is two dimensions. And anything is possible, but only on that plane.
Right.
Depth doesn't exist in the two dimensions.
Yep.
And the moment you go to three dimensions, generally it has the qualities of depth and structure. Things become solid. Things
Okay.
can't be solid in the two dimension. But also, there is this idea that time is linear in the three dimensions. And we know that because our reality is a three-dimensional reality, and we can't go backwards in time.
Right.
We can only go forwards in time. So it's kind of like reading a book where you can only read the text forwards and the pages can only go left to right. They can only go in that direction. But we know as therapists that clients quite often are spending a lot of time in their past,
Oh, yeah.
or they're jumping back and taking a first person perception from a memory. So you've got
Yes.
three things there where clearly the mind is not operating in the same way that a three-dimensional realm would operate.
Hmm.
Otherwise, they would only think forwards. They would only
Right.
be fully in the present. And that's not the case. We have the ability with thoughts to think about something that hasn't happened yet.
Hmm.
And you can call that future pacing, to use therapy terms, or you could call it preparation or planning
Hmm.
or mitigation or a worry. That's the
Or
future.
anxiety too, right?
Yeah, well, I would say a lot of anxiety is a form of anticipatory fear
Yeah.
where you're trying to mitigate the risk of an undesirable outcome.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people do is they teleport forwards to an event that hasn't happened yet to then figure out how to deal with something. So in that moment, they're living in a three-dimensional, but the way that they're thinking is four-dimensional because it
Right.
involves teleportation and time travel, which doesn't exist in a three-dimensional realm. Equally, if someone has PTSD, quite often their body is shaking because they're reliving a moment that might have happened a decade ago.
Yes.
And sometimes people are still dealing with the belief systems that were created in the past. And the more I thought about, and I studied a lot on four dimensions, and one of the key things that changes the fourth dimension compared to the three dimensions is 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 perception and time. They're the two key things. So, for example, a lot of people have heard of the thought experiment of Schrodinger's cat. And Schrodinger's cat is a thought experiment to kind of think about quantum physics effectively. Most people think of a cat in like a cardboard box, but the actual original thought experiment that Schrodinger created was an idea of a cat in a gas-sealed chamber, and there is a bottle of a poisonous chemical that the cat may or may not have tipped over, and therefore, while the gas chamber is sealed, um, then the cat has the possibility of being both alive and dead. But
Hmm.
it's only when you open the box, the gas chamber, that you would find out which is true. But while the chamber is sealed, both possibilities are there.
Right.
And that's very similar to what's called the two slit experiment. So when
Okay.
they fire electrons through two slits,
Yes.
it can act either as kind of molecules or waves, But it depends if someone's observing or not. And then there's
Yes.
this really weird kind of thing that takes place. And this is all based on quantum physics, which is bizarre. It doesn't sound true. It sounds like science fiction, but it has this thing where the observer can influence. In the fourth dimension, you would have multiple perceptions. So if you think of if you're a two-dimensional entity and there is a dot inside of a square, but you're outside of the square, you would never know what is in that square because you can't see beyond the line.
Right.
But in a three-dimensional, you just look over and you see there's a dot. In a
Yes.
four-dimensional realm, you would know, you would have every perception, not just a first-person perception. You would know what's in the box and what's outside of the box at the same time, if that makes sense. So you've got this four-dimensional, and that's called a state of flux where things are possible. So everything's fluid in the fourth dimension, and time isn't linear. So I
Hmm.
thought, what a wonderful structure to kind of think about thinking, but also to empower hypnotherapists to have more tools to interact with people by acting like the imagination is a four-dimensional realm. And that could be metaphors, that could be language patterns, that could be ways of doing things. And most hypnotherapists intuitively do this anyway. They use things like regression, they use future pacing, they use pseudo orientation in time, they use first person, third person perspectives.
Hmm.
But it's just saying, right, well, if we're doing that, we're definitely not treating the imagination and thoughts like a three-dimensional realm. We are already treating it like a four-dimensional realm. And
Yeah.
if that's the case, how do we evolve that even more? Um, and also, what I tend to do when I do that talk is to introduce randomness. So when I did this talk in Ireland, I had three inflatable dice,
Okay.
and depending on what the dice um, rolled, what numbers, that would then determine what I talked about. And at the end,
Interesting.
the reveal is that based on how many rolls of the dice, there was actually 80,000 different combinations. So in the metaverse, there would have been, or the multiverse, sorry, there was 79,998 different versions for them that experienced an entirely different presentation. That's the kind of the reveal. And it's just encouraging people to kind of think differently about the way that we think, the imagination and hypnosis.
That is so powerful because it really expands one's way of thinking because we already think this way. Yeah, you're just bringing it to mind. You're just bringing to the perspective that people we do think this way and we're living it. We're living this every day because there's so many people that are living in the past. They wake up and they think the same thoughts that they had yesterday and they're just living the past where it's like there are so many different options that you can choose. And like that's where it's also like you could say where fate kind of comes in, where it's like you didn't take this bus because something held you back, and next thing you know that there was a robbery or something on the bus. Like you could have taken it and that would have been a different option in this multiverse of possibilities. Although this might be going 50, like 5D dimension, where it's like that there's a possibility of you that did take it. So then there's different aspects of these timelines where
Yeah.
which one
And
are
and,
you
and those,
on? They could
those
be all
those
happening at
multi
the same time.
timelines is powerful. I remember working with a client that had she had a tumor in her breast and she had had the MRI scan, but she hadn't had the results yet. And
Okay.
I did this guided hypnosis session where she imagined going past the point of the event horizon, which is the point where all light and time collapses inside a black hole. And beyond the event horizon, nobody knows what's there because you can't measure, you can't, nothing exists beyond that.
Yeah.
So that became a great metaphor to experience this kind of environment where the rules don't apply. So
Yeah.
effectively, we created a multiverse analogy where she got to visit every single possible connotation of that MRI result,
Hmm.
hearing that the tumor was benign, hearing that the tumor was shrinking, hearing that um, the tumor was completely gone, hearing that the tumor was growing and getting more aggressive, and feeling that she had the resources to cope. And it was dealing with all of those. Now you could look at that as kind of like law of attraction, like she associated into the outcome that she wanted.
Yeah.
But it's also doing what worry naturally does, which is scenario play of all the different kind of iterations and connotations,
Hmm.
but doing it in an empowered way rather than how most people worry is that they start thinking, oh God, what if it's growing?
Yeah.
What do I do? You
All the
know,
things that go
do I
wrong.
need to write a will? All of this kind
Yeah,
of stuff. And that's disempowering, but this was
very
kind of
much so.
done from a place of whatever the scenario was, she would feel empowered.
I love
Um,
that.
and again, it's just using, you know, I smile when I see things like quantum hypnosis and those kind of things because, um, you know, I love metaphor than pretty much any other hypnotherapist that I know, but I know that they're metaphors. And
Yeah.
and 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 sometimes I think hypnotherapists have a tendency to drink their own Kool-Aid and to kind of, you know, go beyond the fact that it's a metaphor, it's an empowering belief system. And then in their mind, by thinking that it's true or real, they feel that's necessary to strengthen their conviction. I
Hmm.
know for a fact it isn't. I
Right.
can believe strongly in the utility of a metaphor without actually believing that it is true. I don't
Hmm.
think you need to believe in the truth. You just have to believe in the usefulness of that. So there's a part of me which, when I see things like quantum hypnosis and kind of um, this kind of element of just vibrate at a frequency and you can manifest whatever you want. It's using the language of quantum physics, but
Yeah.
actually that can be really disempowering because if through that conviction you've got someone that and I've worked with people that, because they've read a lot of law of attraction manifestation and Neville Goddard kind of stuff,
Yeah.
they're kind of in this loop where they totally believe that if they just vibrate at the right frequency, they can manifest whatever they want, but they aren't getting what they want. So now they're being harsh on themselves because they're not quite doing it in the right way.
Yeah.
But then they know that, well, if they are that, then it's negative and that's going to mess up their frequency, so they can't get what they want. And it can
Right.
create this really disempowering kind of cycle. Whereas actually, if you just say, right, these are all just metaphors, and actually, if you believe that you can manifest something, because that puts you in a resourceful state, and by doing resourceful things, that increases the probability of getting what you want. How empowering is that? If, however, you believe that, why aren't you in the relationship that you want? Why don't you have the money that you want?
Hmm.
Because you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
I think that's disempowering. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of gurus and therapists out there that know it isn't true, that know it's just a metaphor, that know the metaphor is quite a sharp double-edged sword that can be empowering or disempowering depending on the lens.
Yeah.
But while it keeps generating revenue and status for them, they keep propagating some of these things. And it's kind of like, well, people are people, they can believe whatever they want. But I think a responsible therapist knows that all of these belief systems at some level, um, you know, are either metaphors or they're just lenses to kind of help clients.
Hmm.
So I think sometimes there is a lack of personal responsibility in it's a lot of, well, you're doing it wrong then, and then
Hmm.
putting the onus on the client. And that I think is shameful, if I'm honest.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's so many different ways to look at that. Even when you're talking about like the different frequency, where they're saying they want to vibrate at certain frequency to get whatever they want, but then there's that underlying tone that they're not. The belief is always going to outweigh the thought, right? So it's like even though
It
you're
does.
thinking this, if you believe this deeper unwanted thought at that deeper level, that's what's going to be the thing that shows up. And then yeah, I can see how they get into that vicious cycle or that loop where it causes maybe some stress and anxiety because they're not getting what they want, because they want to get this, but they're thinking this. They're like, oh, who am I to get that? I can't get that. Even though they're like, yes, I've got this. So like there's that polar opposite thing that's happening too. So
Yeah, there is. And there's a couple of high profile examples of people that kind of manifest things. And I think one of them is Jim Carrey, where, he was on Oprah and he's talking about this kind of $10 million check that he wrote himself.
yes.
And
Want
people
to know a
say,
fun
right,
fact about Jim Carrey? He went
what's
to
that?
high school 15 minutes away from where I live.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Funny that you bring him up of all
that's a very, a
people.
very cool fact. And most people would agree that Jim Carrey is an incredibly talented, incredibly funny guy.
Yes.
In the top 0.001% of that particular skill. So what's more probable isn't that he got a $10 million movie because he wrote himself a check and manifested it. It's probably more likely that he was incredibly talented, built a reputation, worked very hard, and
Yeah.
also happened to write himself a check as a form of affirmation to himself. And
Right.
lo and behold, he got that thing. But people within this kind of manifestation lens would then look at that as it's because he wrote the check. You write a check. How much money do you want to be making? Write a check for yourself, pay it to yourself in advance. That's enough. So, hold on a minute. What about the talent? What about the
Yeah.
work ethic? What about all the networking? What about the reputational, kind of growth that you do over all this time?
Yeah. The action steps
Connor,
to get there.
yeah, and there's
Yeah.
lots of examples of that because if you only look backwards of people that were incredibly successful and then they also manifested something that they want, but you don't also compare that to the 95% of people that had their vision board, focus very much on what they wanted and didn't achieve that. Actually, what
Hmm.
you've got isn't law of attraction, it's cognitive biases. It's the confirmation bias that comes. And I think it's also funny when you look at the people that pride themselves on being great manifestors also happen to be either very attractive or very intelligent or very talented or all three of those things. And it's kind of like, and they happen to believe in manifestation.
Mm.
Yeah. But what if it's one of those other variables that
Yeah.
actually is more responsible? A lazy person with an IQ of 80 that, doesn't look after themselves can't manifest a hell of a lot if we're honest. And I think, there's that lens to look through as well.
It's so, so very true because a person who has, like I say, the person who has an IQ of 80, well, you don't know what you don't know. Where when
Hmm.
you're have more intelligence, we can say, in this perspective, you have a broader understanding and knowledge base of things. But there are still lots of things that say, I don't know that I don't know. And there's lots of things that you don't know that you don't know. But until you take the action to decide you want to learn it or you want to go out and do it, then that you would never even get that, right?
Very true. Um, but you've also got this Dunning-Kruger effect where sometimes people that don't know what they don't know consider that irrelevant because they do know what they do know, and
Yeah.
therefore there is this thing, and you can have this thing. I mean, it's quite often you see it in high performing athletes, boxing, sports, football. They're very talented at that one thing. They accumulate a lot of money, and then they happen to lose it in a very quick period of time because when their career ends, they've got the skill of playing that sport very well, but they don't
Yeah.
necessarily have the skill of money management
Yeah.
and mitigating risk and security and those other things.
Right.
So quite often, you have that kind of other side. So they feel invincible in one part of their life, but suddenly when it changes, other things change as well. And it
Yeah.
isn't to knock law of attraction. I have a
No.
vision board, and
Oh,
I
absolutely
I
not.
goal set all the time. But I just think it's useful as a way of framing it not as something mystical and kind of this quantum realm, but there's benefits to setting an intention. There's benefits from clarity. There's benefits from allocating the resources of your intelligence, time, and effort into specific things so you can notice what's happening.
Yeah.
All of which I think kind of a way is manifesting. But it's funny how the language changes. So, if I said I manifested a certain amount of wealth, people are like, oh, wow, that's amazing. If I just said I worked really hard and I took on risks, kind of seems like boastful in a way.
Yeah.
So I think there's this cultural kind of shift that actually if good things happen, there's more social approval if you just say that you manifested it rather than like, I did that thing. I built that thing. I'm talented or I'm successful. Like it
Right.
feels safer just to kind of attribute it to this kind of mystical thing. And some people will use law of attraction, some people will use religion. They'll say, okay,
Mhm.
thank God for all of this success. It's kind of like, okay, that's more acceptable because it seems less self-appraising and boastful.
Right. But I think it's also good for like manifesting the law of attraction because it's giving you that North Star. It's giving you that set point as to what to work towards. Because if you have nothing to work towards, then you have nothing to work towards. So in that sense, it's really good because it's setting the intentions, it's setting the goals, it's setting that North Star. And then, as Steve Jobs says, you can't connect the dots looking forward, only looking back. So it's like once you
Mhm.
achieve that goal, you can look back to the things that you did that got you there. And so that,
Absolutely. And I think when I think about 4D thinking, the point I was making there wasn't to bash law of attraction. It's just that
oh no.
I look at let's say thinking itself and imagination as more like a four-dimensional realm and more like um, the principles that do exist in four-dimensional physics are more useful as a lens to think about how we think about the imagination than
Mhm.
how we think about our let's say three-dimensional reality.
Yeah,
You don't get time distortion in a three-dimensional reality in the same way that you do in a four-dimensional reality. In a
right.
four-dimensional reality, you can flip back, back in time, forwards in time. We do that in our thoughts all the time. You can think
All
of a
the
memory
time.
and then think of a goal in the future, and you can do that within seconds.
Yeah.
So it's more like a four-dimensional realm.
Yeah. And it's even with the 4D realm, even as like having a conversation with somebody, you can jump back and forward in time, get
Hmm.
lost in time, or like feel like time hasn't even passed at all. Next thing you know, you're having a conversation with somebody who's in 4 hours, and you're like, where'd the time go?
Yeah.
So it's a great way to look at things from a higher level. I always think of the movie Horton. It was the Dr. Seuss book too. Horton Hears a Who. Do you know that one?
No, I don't.
So it's Dr. Seuss called Horton Hears a Who, and Horton is this big elephant, and he hears this voice on a flower, and it's like a speck, and it's the Whoville. You know Whoville, right? From like
Mm,
The
yeah.
Grinch. So he hears this voice on this flower, and it's like this whole different world of Whoville that's on a speck on a flower, yet they can't see or hear the elephant because it's just so big and massive. But it's like Horton, that the elephant knows that there's this whole other world on this little flower. And so even for our perspective, it's like we're here right now talking, the listeners here listening, although there's so much more happening at the same time that it's it's so big to even comprehend that you can't even give it words how big things can go.
Yeah, it's true. And I think, you don't even need a metaphor to do that. If you just think about the size of our galaxy, you
Yeah,
know, let alone the universe, you know, we're smaller than the speck on the leaf. It's
smaller, even smaller than that
even
speck.
smaller than that. That's the scale it takes. So I think, one of the things that, I try and do for myself and encourage clients to do is there was a physicist, quite famous, Carl Sagan, had this kind of almost like a monologue called Pale Blue Dot. And it's because there was this satellite that had this kind of image of Earth from beyond one of the rings of Saturn or Jupiter. And it's just every person that's ever lived, perhaps ever will live, is on this pale blue dot, and it's kind of like when you think about problems in that level and you take that level of disassociation and distance, let alone from a different galaxy,
Yeah,
none of it really matters. Like
no,
it puts things massively into perspective.
it's so true. Because it's like if we're this big and your problem is even smaller, then how big is your problem really?
Yeah. And all you have to do is think back, 3, 4 generations ago, they all had problems. They all had
Yeah.
issues, and they probably had bigger problems than we do. Like,
Hmm.
you know, disease that was incurable,
Yeah.
famines that they didn't know when their next meal was coming from. And, you know, none of them exist now.
No.
It's from a cosmic perspective, it was kind of like the equivalent of a grain of sand in a desert. It's meaningless.
Yeah.
Very important to them at the time. Their whole life depends on it. And I think sometimes changing perspectives can really um, help us with our issues that probably isn't life-threatening diseases and famine to kind of think, oh no, I'm just worried about whether I get that promotion or not. Or I'm just worried about that person that, you know, is gossiping about me. Like when you compare it to some of the other things like historical, like your great grandparents and beyond, like what they would have experienced,
Yeah.
Is it really a big deal? Probably not.
No, they just think it's a big deal because everyone's favorite topic is to talk about themselves. And so in
Hmm.
their world, that it's the biggest deal. I even see with my kids, like sometimes my kids will get into like this funk where something's happening and they think it's the end of the world. And I'm like, dude, you're gonna survive it or whatever. But it becomes like this engulfing thing. And it's not just for my kids, it's for many people where
Hmm.
this problem can overtake them and they can make it its own entity, essentially. They can make it bigger than themselves. And it's like, let's shrink it back down. Let's figure out where this is coming from, why you're thinking this way, so that we can release it or change the perspective so that it's more of that positive, empowering aspect, like you were saying, instead of that disempowering thing where you've given this whole identity, which then can create the physical problems like your one lady was having, right?
Mm, absolutely.
So, what is something, because we have gone way down the rabbit hole with this. I could talk about this stuff all day. I just love talking about this stuff. So, with everything that we've kind of talked about, what is something that the listener could go do if they're having some kind of problem or they're always thinking about the worry of the future of what's going to come? What is something that they could go do to help shift that perspective now so they can get out of this funk or out of this state that they're in to a better one?
So one of the ways that I like to think about stress, and I appreciate the podcast is stress to best. So how I think about stress is um, demands versus resources.
Okay.
So if you've got something to do and you don't have much time to do it, then effectively you have less resources. Time is a resource. And
Okay.
therefore, if the demand exceeds the resources, you're going to feel stressed. And sometimes people are in a period of life where suddenly um, there's something big that's happened. They've lost their job, they're worried about like paying the mortgage, and then all the demands are getting up.
Hmm.
And for a lot of people, because they're worrying they're not sleeping very well, then they have even less resources. And
Right.
when you've got this big deficit between demands and resources, it can feel really overwhelming. And that's when the temptation is to do something that feels like it's going to help, like drink, drugs, food, something like that, just feels like it's making you more resourceful. So if someone's in a situation where they're feeling quite overwhelmed or very stressed, it's good to get it out of your head and get it into reality. So writing a list of what are all the actual demands and then put them in order of what's the most serious kind of demand, what you need to allocate your resources on first, followed by the next one, followed by the next one, just do a brain dump. And then actually then do an audit of your resources. And your resources might be real resources like time, money, people that you know,
Mm,
um, actual kind of help. And sometimes this whole dynamic of demands and resources is just a perception. A lot of the time, the demands aren't quite as big as you think, and you've got more resources than you're aware of. And the
right.
moment resources exceed demand, suddenly you can see the wood for the trees. And then
Love
it's like, oh
this.
no, I can deal with that. And then that
Yeah.
becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because you've got the resources to deal with challenge number one. You accomplish that, and then you focus on the next thing. So that's a pragmatic way. Also, you've got intrinsic resources like confidence, like creativity, like problem solving. So one of the things I do with a lot of my clients is get them to regress back to a time where they had the resource that they need now. Because a lot of people, when they've got these demands, they can't think straight because they're just worrying about all the consequences. But it's like
Right.
when was your back against the wall and you kind of you managed to find a way out, and they're like, oh yeah, that time 6 years ago, there was all this going on, and I managed to find a way out. Okay, let's get you back there. So we can use regression, activate those resource states, and then future pace that so they can actually have them to deal with the very situation they've got now. That can make a difference. So you can increase internal resources. And what if the demands aren't even real demands, but perceptual demands? And in
Yeah.
a voice that says, you're going to mess this up, you're going to let everyone down, you're going to fail. Okay, so one of the easiest things as a therapist to do is just by getting rid of you accept that the real demands are real, but the perceptual demands you reduce, and then you increase internal resources plus their awareness of real resources that they have.
Hmm.
You know, maybe they've got a friend that actually has the very skill that they need that can help solve that problem. They've forgotten about them.
Yeah.
Okay, suddenly you increase resources and reduce demands. That can make a big difference. So if someone's dealing with stress, that's a good framework to look at. And the other thing is that I have a podcast with 1,800 hypnosis sessions. Maybe one of those sessions could be exactly what someone would need to listen to help with their situation, in which case the original client paid for that session, but now it's on the podcast, it's free. So you
Yeah.
could get, you know, I'm not a cheap hypnotherapist, so hypnotherapy completely for free that might be perfect for what your situation is right now. So that might also be, again, we would put that on the resource side because that's a
Yeah.
resource that's free. If someone doesn't know it exists and then they find it, that can help them. And what if that just gets them over the edge where now they've got more resources than demands? Stress goes all the way down.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So would you say put the demands and the resources on the same page or on two separate pages?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to put them on the same page, but on different
Okay.
sides of the page, because
Okay.
what you then want to do once you've got all of your demands, if some of those demands is kind of like a fake demand, like, it's not that it's fake, it's a perceptual demand. So like, well, I'm stressed becomes a demand. Okay, but
Right.
what if you're stressed because you're believing that you've got so many demands? You could draw a
Right.
line through that. What if I'm not sleeping very well? Okay, but what if that you're not sleeping very well is because you've got more cortisol in your blood because you're worrying about all this kind of stuff. So once
Yeah.
you want to filter out all that and say, but what's the actual demand here?
Yeah.
And then you can get that list lower and then think of, right, what resources do I have? And there's always more resources than people ever realize.
Yeah.
And then you can say, what resources do I want? Confidence, motivation, focus. Okay, there are ways of getting those. And one of the easiest ways of getting those is to think back to a time when you've had it
Mm-hmm.
and then reactivate it.
Bring it forward.
Hypnotherapists do this all the time. It's
Yeah.
regression to a resource state. But you don't even need a hypnotherapist. You could just write
Oh,
down, if what you need more right now is confidence, when in my life did I feel the most confident I've ever been? And just
yeah.
imagine going back to that moment and feeling that way, and then you're going to feel more confident. And then suddenly you've made yourself more resourceful, and that can help in the situation that you might be in.
And even in that very moment, you bring the confidence up. You look at that demand, and it's like, oh, that's not even that bad because you just literally in 2 seconds changed your state. Now you feel more confident. You look at that demand, or yeah, the demand, and it's like, oh, that's nothing. Or I was just thinking of it from a negative state. So yeah,
Mhm.
get a piece of paper. On one side, put the demands that you have, physical and internal and external, all those demands, those thoughts, those physical ones. And on the other side, you want to put your resources, all those people, places, things that you already have, plus the internal thoughts you've already done, maybe for confidence, motivation, excitement, joy, whatever it is, and then start to play with this list, number those demands, what what's the most important thing that needs to be dealt with right now or today or whatever, and then go through it, and then it's going to start to change that your stress level so that you can be at more
Yeah.
of a
And just as
neutral
an
place.
anecdote on that, I was working with a teacher that was secretly drinking gin.
Okay.
And what she would do is whenever she felt overwhelmed, and overwhelmed is just more demands than resources, is that she was drinking gin to make her forget about all of these demands.
Mm,
Okay. And it kind of worked. But then when the alcohol wore off, now the demands are still there, but she's used up time that could have been used to chip away at some of those demands.
yeah.
So now then that stress, that anxiety all comes back. Oh no, but drinking worked before. And that's how people can quite often get themselves into, addictions. It's not because they're trying to sabotage their life. Actually, what they're trying to do is have a coping strategy to help. But sometimes the coping strategy that helps actually makes the whole thing worse.
Yeah.
And then it becomes that spiral.
Yeah.
So when I worked with her, just saying, right, okay, what if she leans into that and says, right, okay, instead of the alcohol, I'm going to feel that. I'm going to feel that stress and I'm going to use it, you know, appreciate the gift of cortisol, focus the mind, and then think of what one thing can I do now? And then
Hmm.
do that thing. And then you get the dopamine from the accomplishment of making progress rather than, just turning the brain off for 2 or 3
Right.
hours, which
Yeah.
is a sticky plaster on a wound. Like it's not going to help.
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. So with your podcast, I know it's the main place to find you is on Spotify, right?
It's on all the major platforms, so Spotify, Apple. I also have a YouTube channel. It's on Amazon Music as well. And if you look for The Hypnotist,
The
uh, you'll
Hypnotist.
you'll you'll find it.
Okay. And so if someone's looking for a specific thing, would they type in the hypnotist and then the issue and something should come up?
Yeah.
Or do they have to scroll
Or you
through
can
all a
search within the
thousand?
channel itself. You can search within the channel and then
Okay.
so if someone, wants, if they think they've got PTSD, if they think they've got um, intrusive thoughts, they could put intrusive thoughts hypnosis within the channel of the hypnotist, or just put the hypnotist intrusive thoughts, and that should come up.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Awesome. So I know you're speaking at a conference. Is there anything else you would like to say about that or leave us with some parting words before we...
No, if anyone is within the vicinity of Chicago, it's the Mid America Conference. The website is hypnosisconference.org. You can see tickets there. There's some last minute tickets available. Outside of that, for anyone in the UK, I'm at the UK Hypnosis Conference in November. So you can see me there, and that talk will be about nested loops.
Are you going to the Irish one I know it's not till April, but are you going to the Irish one again this year?
I'm not this year, no, next
Gotcha.
year.
So we got the Chicago one, or we've got the UK one in November. And yeah, if you want to find Adam's podcast, it's called The Hypnotist, as well as it'll be in the show notes. And yeah, so it's gonna be fun. I'm looking forward to this conference that's coming up. So it's going to be a
Brilliant.
great time.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Adam, for joining us today. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I would love if you could, if you got something from this, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Give them that aha moment. Give yourself that aha moment and really take the action and write down that list and see if you can help decrease your stress in some way, shape, or form. I hope you have the most amazing day, and we'll talk to you all in the next episode.